Hello, welcome to Naresh Technologies. This is Sudhakar Sharma. In this session, we will discuss about how to create an MVC application. In the previous sessions of MVC, we discussed about MVC architecture, what are the basic components of MVC, how MVC framework for web works. We discussed all the basic history of the architectural functionality. After understanding the architecture of MVC, now we will create our first MVC application and we will take a look of the complete infrastructure of MVC application. So, we are now going to create our first MVC application and see the infrastructure of MVC application. So, for this we are using Visual Studio 215. We are trying to build a MVC application. Here you can create an MVC core application or you can create an MVC5 application. First we will see how do we create an MVC5 application, then we will take a look about how do we create an MVC core application. What is the difference between the two applications, what is the infrastructure of core and what is the infrastructure of MVC5. So, first we will try to create an MVC5 application and see the infrastructure of MVC5 application. So, for that I am switching to Visual Studio 215 and we are selecting a new project here. Select a new project. In the new projects, in the installed templates, we are going to Visual C#. Here we are selecting web. You have a special category of core available. If you have the community edition with updated with the core framework, then you will find this core where you can build core class library, core console application and a core web application. Initially we will go into the web category. In the web category you will find ASP.NET web application. ASP.NET web application by using .NET framework. You also have ASP.NET Core web application which is using .NET Core. .NET Core is nothing but it is an open source and it is suitable for all types of platforms like Unix, Windows and OS X. So, it is completely cross platform and open source. You have one more ASP.NET Core web application with the .NET framework. This will create an ASP.NET Core application with .NET framework which is not an open source. .NET framework is not open source. Core framework is open source. .NET framework is not open source and it is just only for Windows. So, we can build ASP.NET application core and ASP.NET application .NET framework. Initially I am selecting ASP.NET web application with .NET framework. So, when we are using .NET framework and we are going to create an web application which can use the features of web forms, MVC and web API. That is what we discussed in our early sessions about unified architecture. That means a single ASP.NET web application is now integrated with the features of web form, MVC and web API. So, we are just selecting the ASP.NET web application and name this application as some MVC demo. Okay. Now, let us add this application. Now, this will prompt to select a template and you can see all the available templates here in the project. That is, these are all the templates. You have an empty application, web form application, MVC. You have an API and SPA, single page application. You have Azure apps and Azure mobile services. So, initially we will select an empty application so that we can configure everything as per the requirement. So, we do not want all the unnecessary libraries to be included. We will add the libraries for our application as per the requirement. So, we are selecting an empty ASP.NET template, and in ASP.NET empty template we are adding the references for web forms. That is what we discussed, that Visual Studio provides an unified development environment where you can build a simple application which can have the features of web forms, MVC and API. Initially we do not want the references for web forms, we want the references for MVC. As we are creating the MVC application, we can select that. If you are creating an API, then you can select with the API. You want API with the combination of MVC, then you can add both references of MVC API, and you want web forms also, then you can choose. That means you are now creating a single ASP.NET web application which uses the features of web forms, MVC and web API. So, initially we are not selecting the web forms and the web APIs, we are just going with MVC. So, we are selecting an empty project and with the references of MVC. Another important point here about unit tests. So, MVC provides test driven development from Visual Studio 215 along with your general projects. So, web application projects, you can add a test project. This will add a unit test project to your application to perform unit testing. That means it will support test driven development. Initially we do not want any unit test projects, so we are unchecking this option. We will later learn about how to test the applications once we done with the development of application. So, we do not want any unit test projects here. Another very great feature about the new version available is it is cloud ready. That means on premises to cloud, you can directly host the applications to cloud. That is the reason why it is now asking you here an Microsoft Azure, so that you can directly host the application in cloud. If you have any Azure account, so then you can directly host this application on Azure. That we will see in Azure sessions, how do we host the application on cloud. So, initially we are not selecting to host on cloud, because for this we need an cloud account to be configured and we need to host that application, that we will see in later stage. So, initially we are just selecting a new template, an empty with the references of MVC. Now, let us add this project. Now, we will see what is the basic infrastructure of every MVC application when it is created. Generally, every MVC application, here remember we are not using any template, here we are using an empty application. What an empty MVC application comprises of, what are the key components in that MVC application? Let us see the infrastructure of MVC application. So, once the project is created, remember this is an empty project with the references of MVC, then you go to the Solution Explorer and see here in the Solution Explorer you can find these are all the default available files and folders in your application. What are these basic files and folders? What is the role and responsibility of them? Let us see. We already know about the properties and references. What are all the packages that we are using? What are all the libraries that we are using in our application? They are defined in the references. Properties will contain all the assembly info, and app data, you can see a folder app data. App data is the default ASP.NET folder which comprises of local database files. Local database files, that means which have the extension MDF, SDF. You can use an inbuilt SQL server for your databases in the .NET application environment. In that situation, the local database files are defined in a special folder called app data. So, app data comprises of all the local database files. Now, app start is a folder that contains collection of classes which are intended to run on application startup. That means we want some classes to be configured on the application startup, so that they are loaded into the memory and they are available on application startup. So, if you want any classes to run on application startup, then you can configure all those classes in a special folder called app start. By default, generally app start is a folder that comprises of files like route config and bundle config and filter config and startup authentication. And if you have defined web API also, then we have web API config also into this, but that is when web API is configured. So, typically MVC application comprises of a route config, a bundle config, a filter config, startup authentication and web API config. That means these are all the classes present in MVC that are intended to run on application startup. That means you can see by default actually we are creating an empty application. In empty application there will be only one file that will be route config here, because we do not have any filters, we do not have any APIs, we do not have any bundles defined in that situation. So, they will be added only when we manually define and configure them. But every application requires a route so that user can be redirected to that particular controller action. You can make a request and access. So, route is by default defined in every empty application. If we are using an empty application in AppStart, we can find only one file, that is route config. But what are the basic important files present in AppStart? These are a route config, bundle config, filter config, startup authentication and web API config. These are the basic standard files that are regularly available in a folder called AppStart. So, app data contains the local database files, AppStart contains the classes that are intended to run on application startup. Then we have a controllers folder. All the controller classes are defined in the controllers folder. So, controller comprises of all the controller classes. In MVC architecture, we discussed about the controller and the model and the view. Controller, as we discussed, that controller is a class and it comprises of methods that are intended to respond to various HTTP requests like GET, POST requests. Controller classes are configured inside a folder called controllers. So, controller contains all the controller classes, and models contains the classes that are intended to communicate with the database. That means the classes that are representing the data we are working with as well as the business. So, model contains the classes that are responsible for communicating with the database. That means just business specific logic. They speak what the data we are working with, and they are also responsible for communicating with the database. So, model contains classes that are responsible to communicate with the database. They represent the data we are working with, as well as they are responsible for the communication with the database. So, model contains all the business logic to communicate with the database. And views contains the entire UI, user interface. That means your pages, your user controls, your master pages, everything are configured inside the views. So, UI in MVC is built with pages, controls and master pages, and all these are defined in the folder views. And by default, views is having a web config file which is responsible for configurations for the views. However, you will have a web config file globally so that you can configure the entire application from here. And we have others, I need not to explain about this because you have the background of ASP.NET so that you can understand what is global.asx. It is a global application class file, and packages config, it contains the list of all the packages that are installed in your application. So, global ASX comprises of, it is the global application class file, it defines all the options to be defined on application startup. You can observe here in global.asx you have a route config file. Let us map this route config file. I will press F12 function key. This route config is default defining to the route config class, and actually this route config class is present in the folder. So, what is the folder? It is present in AppStart. That means whatever you want on application startup that you define in global.asx and that you store inside this AppStart folder. And package config comprises of the list of all the packages that are installed in your application. You are adding the new packages into your application, you can get the list of all the packages available here. And you know the global application configuration file, that is the web config. So, whenever we create an MVC application, this is the basic file system that comprises of. So, what are the key folders into the file system? We have app data, contains local database files. We have AppStart, it contains the local database files. App start contains all the classes that are intended to run on application startup. We have controllers, which comprises of controller classes. Models contains the classes that are responsible for interacting with the database. Views contains the entire UI. However, so when you are adding various references to your project, you will get some more extra folders. The general folders that you see other than these are, you will see a folder called content, you will see a folder called fonts, and you will see a folder called scripts. These three folders are according to the requirement. Suppose you install a package for Bootstrap, these three folders will be added into your project, where content contains non-dynamic files, that means CSS, images, all they are present in a folder content. Fonts comprises of collection of all the fonts that are required for the Bootstrap, and scripts will contain the collection of all the JavaScript files that are used for your application. And remember, these are not by default available in empty application. These will be added into your project whenever you are adding the references for Bootstrap. For example, suppose I am installing Bootstrap for my project. How to add packages? You can go to references, right click on references and select the option as manage NuGet packages. In references, I am selecting manage NuGet packages. You can see the NuGet package manager will open, and here you want to install. So here you want to install Bootstrap, then you can go to the browse category. You can go to the browse category and search for Bootstrap. When I search for Bootstrap online, that means it will get to the package manager and it will get the list of all the packages. So we will include the pre-releases also. Then whatever the packages available for Bootstrap, it will get the list of all the packages. You will get the list of all the packages available. In the list of all the packages, you have to select the Bootstrap package and install the package. There is another method of installing the package. You can select from the NuGet package manager. You can choose the package that you want and you can install the package, or you can do one more. You can go to the tools menu and go to the option NuGet package manager. In the NuGet package manager, you will have a package manager console. In the package manager console, you can install the package. Now this is the package manager console that opens in Visual Studio. We have this package manager console, and here we need to type the command install -package, and the package is Bootstrap -pre includes the preview release. And when I install this package, it will search for the package in the package resource. If it finds the package from the package resource, it will download and install the package into the project. And when you install the packages like Bootstrap into your project, then you will get the additional folders here, the folders like content and fonts and scripts. Now you can see that here it is adding all the references, and after adding the references, it is asking to make changes into the packages config. Let's continue with that. And you can see it says that successfully installed jQuery. It successfully installed all the Bootstrap related options into your project. Once everything is installed, let's go into the architecture and see the infrastructure, what exactly the new solutions explorer comprises of. And you can observe here it's already added a folder called scripts, and still it is installing the package Bootstrap. And you can observe that once the Bootstrap is added, then it will install the options like contents and fonts. So what is the basic file system architecture of MVC application? What are the important files and folders in MVC application? One, you will find app data. App data contains local database files. You will have app start. App start contains the files that are intended to run on application startup. You have content. Content contains non-dynamic files. You have controllers. Controllers will contain controller classes. Models will contain the classes that are responsible for interacting with the database. and views will comprise of UI, application user interface, and you will have scripts which contains JavaScript and jQuery files. So, this is all the basic infrastructure of an MVC application. Now, in our later session we will discuss how do we start with that MVC application. So, how do we create a controller, how the request pass it to the controller, how it will return values. So, that we will continue in the next video session. Thank you.